Hello, I'm Toycat, and this is Turkey, a country which recently changed its name, and this is their ruler, someone who hasn't changed in a very long time. In fact, for over 20 years, Erdogan has been in power, and even more suspiciously, if you're the sort of person being like, it's a strong man holding elections, huh? But the crazy thing is he was prime minister from 2003 to 2014, and then he gave the position of presidency a lot more power, and then all of a sudden he became the president. And so there are presidential elections happening in Turkey, and the crazy thing about it is despite what I've just told you, they actually are quite close. This isn't a situation where they are elections, even though there's a lot of political craziness that's happened with Erdogan. This is actually a set of elections where it looks like about 50-50 as to whether Erdogan will win or whether his challenger, Kemal, whether his friend over here will win. And you know, the crazy thing about this is it seems as though geriatric politics, electing people who are way too old and probably about to die, is not just limited to the Western world. As you can see, Turkey's getting involved with that too, because are we going to get the 69-year-old or are we going to get the 74-year-old young upstart challenger? Who knows for sure, but let's go through exactly what's happening in Turkey, because my favorite thing about any of this is we get to go through election maps. Mapping countries by elections is one of those ways you can realize just how similar we all truly are and the way our interests start to align just based on where we live in a country. But let's take a step back and say what's happening in Turkey, and I love this Reuters 4-fact feature. Turkey is holding presidential elections tomorrow. There are elections being held literally tomorrow as you watch this video. I guess you could be watching this video anytime. There are elections being held tomorrow for me in the present right here. You in the future are gonna see what happens in those, and opinion polls show that the Erdogan opposition have a slight lead right now. Ankara, the capital of Turkey, could see a new path after 2 decades under Erdogan, whereas the way that his opposition is doing quite well is that he's backed by an alliance of 6 opposition parties. This is one of those things that makes Turkey not necessarily unique, but maybe different to the politics you might follow. Unlike in most Western countries, when countries get really big, they tend to get election alliances. And so if you look at the, the 2018 Turkish presidential election, you'll see that Erdogan won as part of the People's Alliance, whereas, his opposition from the CHP are part of the Nation Alliance, and then the third biggest party are from the HDK, and then the fourth biggest party are also in the Nation Alliance, which makes things a bit confusing with these two. Anyway, long story short, you can see that actually, yeah, Turkey has a broadly pro-Erdogan view, except in the really close to Europe bits, which are very, very red, and then the very close to Asia bits, or the close to the Middle East bits, I guess I should say, because most of the country is Asian, are very, very purple, and the Purple Party are biggest with the Kurds, whereas Erdogan is broadly popular with the Turkish middle part of the country, which sounds like it would be a lot of people until you realize that, like, well, Turkey is actually a very, very urbanized country. If we, so something that took me embarrassingly long, because, Turkey has 2 huge cities, Istanbul and Ankara. Istanbul, if you go to biggest European cities, is the biggest by such a decent margin. Like, almost 16 million people live in Istanbul. That is more than most EU members just in this one European city. And then Ankara would be the 4th biggest city, or the 5th biggest city in Europe. And it took me embarrassingly long to work out why Ankara, this city right here, was not on this list of biggest European cities. So, my bad there, apparently. Anyway, long story short, Turkey is going through an election, and they've got to decide between 2 leaders. Erdogan has this big strongman persona, whereas the opposition has this, goal of bringing Turkey back to its previous international norms. So he wants to go back to the parliamentary system, where he'll become prime minister eventually. He wants to go back to a system where the country actually is integrating more of the West rather than kind of keeping it at bay. And this is the big primary push between these two people. As for which actually seems more likely, the opinion polling does give a slight edge for, Erdogan's opposition right here. And, do you want me to try and pronounce this right here? Let's do it. I'm a big believer in every pronunciation is correct. And so Kilik Deroglu is actually doing pretty well in this election. Kilik Deroglu from the Nation Party is currently, why do we translate the party names? Why don't we leave them in Turkish too, huh? However, most of as you can see, the polls have varied, but in general, the lead is in his court, which means the odds being 50-50 is probably a bit skewed. It's probably a bit more in favor of Kılıçdaroğlu. However, these are the sorts of things that it's so close where the election margin of error is probably about leading to the fact that you don't actually know until it happens. Will Erdogan win, or will it be his opposition? We don't know until people vote, which I guess is technically true for every country. country. But yeah, the interesting thing about why Kılıçdaroğlu is doing so well, why the 74-year-old man from Turkey is going to be doing well, it's not because of his pro-Europe policies or anything like that, even though there's a lot of interest because, the EU loves to hate Erdogan is a really interesting point that you might not realize. But even though that seems like it's a good point of it, the Turkish people are finally done with this whole nationalist attitude. The actual truth is, first of all, the earthquakes, like any big natural disaster, it's going to kind of prove that a strong man can't keep you safe forever. If he can't stop elections, why have him in charge? But the other kind of big reason is if we go back and look at the 2018 presidential election, you'll see how, again, the country is very red in the west, it's very purple in the east, and then it's yellow broadly in the middle. This is a kind of split between the opposition, which lots of countries have. If you're, to Americanize this for you, if you're watching from over there, it's like if the west of America wanted Bernie Sanders and the east wanted Joe Biden, and the broad middle wanted whichever, Republican politician. The broad middle is going to win every time, unless the west and the east are united on whichever blue person they want. If you look in the UK, it's like if the north of England want the Labour Party or the SNP. The north of England loves the SNP, trust me on that one. This whole place is called England, and so the SNP are very popular in the north of England. Trust me on that. Leave a comment if you disagree with that, though. Got to boost my engagement for this video. And then in the southwest, you can see that there's the Lib Dems who are popular, and so then the broad conservatives in the middle might win that one. In general, the left fractures off more for elections, which is why this one is notable, because after the last election, where the left is split between basically three parties, right? We've got the very pro-Kurdish party over here, who have decided not to stand in this election. We've got this party who are doing much worse, and there was another centrist party who backed out solely because they've, again, come together to realize, okay, let's at least have one unity candidate for this, which is why, when you look at it, there are basically three parties running. There's Erdogan, there's Kılıçdaroğlu, and then there is Inci over here. And so he's part of the Homeland Party, and there's a really interesting story about how they're basically, they're pretty far right on the political spectrum. But basically what this leads to is a very interesting situation where Turkey is, going to presumably have an actually fair election as opposed to, not a fair election, a unified, left of center election versus one which is more broadly split, which means that there is a real chance that the leader is unseated, which means the very interesting thing of the EU having to grapple with closer relations with Turkey. Why would the EU not want closer relations with Turkey? Turkey, if you don't know, when you think of countries that are close to the European sphere of influence, but not, you get countries like Russia generally, where you're like, oh yeah, those guys aren't friends, or you get Belarus, and then you start to get, more friendly countries like the Ukraines, the Albanias, the Moldovas, and then you've got Turkey, where a lot of people aren't sure where to place them, but Turkey is the most key NATO ally. The reason that Turkey can goof around as much as they have for the last 20 years and still be important is because this is an incredibly valuable NATO position. One, Turkey is literally in the Middle East and the east of their country. This is very ideal for, does the West like to go to the Middle East? You tell me, internet. Have there been any wars involved where the West and the Middle East have been at conflict with one another? You'd have to let me know. I feel like that would have come up in the news or something by now if that happened, right? So being in the Middle East, super strategic. Being a really close country to Russia, they literally are across from each other on the Black Sea. The Russian president can be drinking tea in Sochi and be directly across the sea from, a NATO force, effectively. They're concerned about NATO being on their borders of Ukraine, but they've really got, NATO on their sea borders at the right now. The entire Russian access to the sea hinges upon the Bosphorus Strait right here being open to Russian, ships, which means that in reality, Russia doesn't have any warm water access to the ocean that doesn't involve going through a NATO member. NATO has an absolute checkmate on Russia while Turkey remains in the alliance. Also, regarding the EU, here's the fun thing. Even though, Turkey ideally would be closer to the EU and ideally would be closer to NATO and be more friendly and all that sort of stuff, the fun thing about it, as I think this Politico article really well sums up, is the fact that, honestly, having, Erdogan in charge and doing his crazy stuff, taking an increasingly authoritarian turn, it allows the EU to just sidestep the question of whether Turkey should join its ranks. I mentioned before how Turkey has the biggest city in Europe, right, with Istanbul, which is, a pretty cool thing. However, as far as like Turkey's GDP per capita, or as far as Turkey's like, you can see it's like they're ranked 46th in the world, which isn't bad. It's no small accomplishment. But when you compare it to the rest of the European Union, who are dark blue or dark green on this map, in the 50 or $60,000 numbers, having 80 million people. Yeah, just confirm. Having 85 million people join a bloc that is free movement for people, goods, and services is going to be one of the hardest pills to swallow for a lot of people who, again, like we always like to have this opinion where people love and accept pure tolerance of, people would open their borders up to any country if they could. However, in reality, a lot of countries find very rapid changes to be hard. And although, for example, French people might be okay with large numbers of Germans or Spanish people or Belgians or Swedish people coming into their borders, it gets a lot harder when you start talking about, Hungarians or Bulgarians or, I like that they have the same ending to that, or Turkish people. Turkarians is what they're now known as, to make that rhyme. The further away you get from Europe, the more people start to strain in that way. And so the European Union as a whole has a big kind of issue of the whole point of the movement is to build a country. But how do you build a country of someone that's so different to you? And it's not just different to you in terms of like that cultural factor, like, oh yeah, the people there, they look kind of slightly more brown than the people in Europe, huh? No, it's actually like the very geography of it. The very, it would be the first Muslim majority nation joining the EU, and so there would be a huge shift in every single part of how the EU works, which is why rather than having to seriously talk about it, the EU is much happier with the current situation where it's like, we've invited the guys to join, and then Erdogan says, yeah, we really would love to join. They can both say they're joining, meanwhile Erdogan is doing everything in his power to make sure they don't, and the EU is going, yeah, we would love to have you over for dinner, but you're all the way in over there, and you're not coming over. This is the worst. You ever make plans to hang out with a friend like that, where you're like secretly glad they're like, oh yeah, well I guess if you can't make it, that's a shame. Yeah, that's I'm not going to ask anymore though. This was my polite reminder. Thank you very much. That is kind of how the EU feels about Turkey. I think there is a huge, the relationship between Turkey and the EU needs to stay at a certain level, but that level going towards full integration is a little bit tricky. When Turkey being a separate thing that's just over there in the corner might be for the best of the EU. Maybe this is true for all sorts of fractious countries. Maybe when the UK says whatever's going on with us, and we're like, we're doing our whole thing over here, and the EU is like, well, at least, so the UK was one of the most Eurosceptic countries. By removing the UK from the bloc, sure, the EU loses one of its biggest contributing states, but on the other hand, now the EU can actually integrate in a much better way closer together, and so keeping members that don't truly want to integrate out to the fringes might actually be for the best, and so that is where the EU is kind of sitting at right now. And so what happens in Turkey is very much a Turkish-specific issue. However, having a new person take over who is very broadly pro-West might actually present some fun issues, where now it's the, now he accepts the invitation to come to dinner, and you're like, oh no, I'm not hosting it that day, I'm hosting it tomorrow, but you're not free then, are you? And then he's like, no, I'm free tomorrow, I could come over for dinner then. And it's like, oh, it's not on Friday, actually, it's on Christmas Day, but you can't come over to a party on Christmas Day. And he's like, I guess I could come for the morning. And you're like, oh no, I just realized I'm working Christmas Day. Can you do it 4 years from now? Maybe after there's another election? There's a really funny kind of balance that's to be had there. And also, as a whole, Turkey might actually, we don't know until the election's held, might move away from a system where the president is the most powerful person again, back to a parliamentary style election, which is incredibly interesting because, in reality, the parliamentary elections are basically the same as the presidential elections. You can see there are very slight differences where, for example, this district over here, this little purple one, in the presidential election, they went red, whereas here they went purple. Over here, this area went red, whereas in I guess it's slightly different districts. But you can see there's a slight difference in how the country votes from election to election, but they might be moving back towards a more parliamentary democracy as opposed to an executive style. And this is, I guess they're moving towards more of a British system, maybe, and less towards an American system, also maybe. By the way, before I leave this video, because a lot of people have been asking for this for me, being like, oh, Toycat, have you, why didn't you make a video about the coronation? You're British. Isn't that your favorite thing? First of all, I was in Vegas. I've now left Vegas, by the way, it's very sad. I miss it a lot. It's such a bizarre place to live. Like, just being able to walk a few minutes and being like, this is your view is always, it's never going to be a normal thing, right? But it was a wild time. This is it. But anyway, the point is, I enjoyed it a lot. Would recommend, if you've got to pick a city from scratch in the US, there is no question it should, like, Las Vegas should be on your shortlist. Like, maybe one of the big Texas cities if you hate yourself and you don't mind humidity. I could see, there being a fair few cities of choice all over the coast. I think the best city tax-wise is Vancouver, Washington. I've said that before. But Las Vegas is a very obvious choice. But to go back to my point, I'm now in the UK where we have a new king or something. And what are my opinions on the new king? My opinions on the UK having a new king is it's absolutely hilarious that one of a Papua New Guinea minister had to quit because his daughter posted videos of her going on a luxury trip as a result of him being part of the delegation. His daughter Savannah, who names their daughter after a Minecraft biome. Come on. But she posted a TikTok video showing her first-class plane journey, and it really upset people, and so Papua New Guinea's lost their minister at a time where both India's Prime Minister and Mr. Biden are visiting. That's a pretty big deal for Papua New Guinea, huh? Speaking of Papua New Guinea, they're still in the process of making that new country. Will happen any day now. You're gonna see it happen, just like not too soon. Also, yeah, wild country. Actually, I would love to go to Papua New Guinea. What do you think's happening over there right now? Should we find out? There's a Hilton, there's a Mumu, and there's an Annie's Pottery. Should we see what's happening over there? Let's see. They got this big road. Okay, no street view. Well, they got Jackson's International Airport, and let's see what's happening over here. Looks pretty good. We should go. I mean, clearly not any time a king's being coronated, lest we be roasted for the first-class flights we take. But yeah, with that said, man, it's a pretty small capital city, huh? They've got a Mormon church there. That's crazy, huh? Anyway, speaking of things that are crazy, this video's over now. Hope you all enjoyed it. I have a new series-ish coming soon. I mean, can you have new series on a channel where it's just a guy talking to a camera? You can't really, but I have a new series-ish coming soon. It's going to be great. Remember, the videos are going to stay nice and low quality, but I want to do something kind of fun with it, so we'll be talking about the Western Hemisphere a bit because I spent a lot of time there, and I'm going to milk it for videos. And so I hope you all enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one. And also, I'll see you tomorrow when Turkey has a new leader, and we have to work out what's going on there. Anyway, goodbye. Or not. Yeah, or not. Who am I to end my own videos? I don't know what I would be doing if I had